Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Doom Productions podcast, a podcast hosted by Doom Productions. I'm Jordan, and usually I am joined by Zach and Ethan, my fellow directors here at Doom Productions, and we talk about movies and all things movies. But once again, we are at a solo episode this week. It is the week of Thanksgiving. It's Monday, Tuesday, the 22nd when I'm recording this, and everybody has their Thanksgiving family plans. And so Doom Productions is taking a week off in terms of our meeting, but we'll be back up and running again next week with our normal lineup here of hosts. And so it's a solo episode today. And unlike usual, I actually have something to talk about. Well, I think I have something to talk about usually, but I took some notes this time, so I've come prepared a little bit. For viewers who are new, Doom Productions, we are a film studio that we release our movies on YouTube for free, our feature-length movies on YouTube for free. We also post weekly podcasts and weekly videos where we try to pass on what knowledge we have and what kind of wisdom we've gained along our filmmaking journey. So if you're interested in filmmaking, follow us for our videos and podcasts. If you're interested in just watching good movies, give us a follow because we'll be posting updates on when we have new stuff coming out and don't want you to miss it because we're a little biased, but we think the stuff we make is pretty cool. So, yeah. Today, if you've seen our video this week, we talked about screenwriting. And we talked about the kind of guiding question that we had for the episode was, how do you write? When do you write? Where do you write? And for how long do you write? As kind of a sort of preamble into that conversation of screenwriting, so to speak. I've made videos on screenwriting. I've made podcasts on screenwriting before. And I feel like a lot of my feeling or a lot of my personal knowledge or what I have to say on the subject of screenwriting, a lot of it is kind of scattered around this channel. And I figured I'd sit down today and do a little, I guess, here's everything I got. Not necessarily like, here's your masterclass on how to write a perfect script or this, and that. But, this is, I guess, my core beliefs, so to speak, in terms when it comes to screenwriting. My core beliefs as a writer, advice I follow, things to avoid, things to do, not do, all that kind of stuff. I guess in a way it is kind of like my masterclass. But again, I don't know what I'm going to call it, but this is everything I know about screenwriting, stuff that I think people would find useful. I think it's very common for screenwriters or filmmakers just in general to have trouble with screenwriting. And it's a common question, and it's a common thing that I think filmmakers struggle with. And, so if you're someone who struggles with putting words onto paper or, typing out your script, do not feel alone because there's lots of people out there who feel that exact same way. As I said, it's a common thing to, be a filmmaker and scratch your head at like, oh, gee, I have this idea for a movie, but how do I make it happen? How do I make a good script, or how do I craft this movie? Because your script is a blueprint. And at the end of the day, it's going to be kind of your guiding document for your movie. And if you don't have a solid foundation, the house can crumble. There's some more nuance to that, but that's for my intents and purpose here. That analogy works because a lot of people, filmmakers, they don't know how to write or are daunted by the task of writing, and they struggle with it. And I certainly have. But it's something that I've gotten better at through the years. Now, my relationship with the writing is as far as I can remember, I've always been writing, and not even just scripts, but like plays and books and stuff like that. Since I was like in grade school, like I'd always write little stories or come up with worlds and stuff like that. But I started screenwriting when I was, I think, in middle school, I want to say. Even if it wasn't that serious, I definitely was writing stuff in high school and producing scripts. I think in middle school it was more like little sketches and little short films and stuff like that. But I was producing more serious stuff in high school. Now that stuff was god awful and absolutely terrible, but I've been writing for a really long time, and that's not to say that I'm the best writer. I mean, I'm far from the best writer. In fact, I'm at a place in my filmmaking journey where I don't even consider writing to be all that important, which is kind of my hot take, which I'll kind of get to in this video. But the way I look at it is, let's say I started writing at 13. I don't know exactly what age, but 13 sounds about right. 13 to 23. I mean, not how old am I? 13 to 27. So that's 14 years of writing, of screenwriting that I've done. That is a long time to be writing. And at least for all of those years, I've produced at least one feature-length script, since I started. So that's 14 scripts. But there's some years where I've written upwards of 8 feature film scripts in a year. So I've lost track of how much I've written. And again, that doesn't mean I'm the best writer. I'm far from the best writer, but it means I have a lot of experience, because I believe that if you do something for long enough, you're going to get better at it, and you're going to learn tips and tricks. And you've kind of heard that saying, it's from a movie, the 1,000 years journey begins with a single step, or something like that. There's also the paint. I don't know what art form this is used for, but I've heard this phrase that you don't make a good painting until you've done 1,000 paintings. You know what I mean? And so your skills and your ability as a screenwriter, part of that boils down to how much time you've put into your art form, how much time you've put into writing. Again, I really want to emphasize that doesn't mean I'm a better writer than anybody, but that just means that I am further along in my own personal journey than some people are. And some people are much further along their journey than I am. And we're all at different places. And I think first and foremost, when it comes to comparing yourself to others, that's never a helpful way to do it. I think you can't compare yourself to anybody else necessarily. You have to compare yourself to yourself. So working in a school, something we work on with our students is, our job is not to teach X amount of things or this curriculum per se. I mean, obviously there's curriculum that is good for students to be at grade level. I forgot to clarify if anybody doesn't know anything about us. I work in a school. And so something that we work on with our kids is, obviously there is curriculum that is for the grade level and would be great if students would know by the end of the year. That doesn't always happen. Ideally, especially post-COVID, it's way more important that students just make improvements from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, that they're improving. And that's really what any art form is like, and any kind of craft or hobby is just putting in those hours, making improvements. So really, don't compare yourself to anybody else. Compare yourself to where you were a year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago or however long. I know that myself at 13 or 14, I was a completely different screenwriter, a different writer back then than I am now. And that's kind of, that will happen with anybody. Again, for the billionth time, which you all are probably sick of hearing about, that doesn't mean I'm a perfect screenwriter. Doesn't mean that I know exactly, doesn't mean that I'm a master at this, right? It just means I've done it a lot and I've learned a few things along the way. And I will throw out that, if you're questioning my credentials, which, you have that right, I wouldn't blame you. There's lots of screenwriting competitions out there and film festivals where you can submit your scripts to be read, and you get feedback from readers and writers and stuff. And a lot of the times the people that are judging those works, those judges, they aren't necessarily well-known people in the industry. Some of them have not even gotten anything produced ever or worked on anything. But they're judges in this thing. And so what gives them any more right to judge those screenplays as it does me to talk about screenwriting just in general terms? So that's my argument to anyone who thinks I'm unqualified. which is, just look at screenwriting competition judges, because those are something that people put a lot of stake in. A lot of screenwriters, unfortunately, which I guess that's thing that I know, or Jordan's screenwriting advice number one: screenplay competitions are trash. Don't submit to them. Um, I'm not gonna elaborate on that. I'm just throwing that out there. So yeah, let's move on to my actual real first point. So advice number one, first piece of information, and I've talked about this before on this channel, but I'm a strong believer in discipline versus motivation, or discipline over motivation. So the thing with discipline is, well, let's define those two things. Inspiration. So what is inspiration? Inspiration is when you are in the mood to create. It can happen after you see a really great movie, or you get an idea for a project that really captures your imagination, something that you were excited to write. That is inspiration. Discipline is routine. It is ritual. It's making sure that you write a page every day, or setting aside an hour every day to write something. And it is not as fun as inspiration. Unfortunately, that because you can't always write when you are inspired, because you aren't always inspired. When you're stuck on a scene or anything, inspiration's not going to save you necessarily, but discipline will. It's a muscle you have to use, otherwise you won't get stronger. And it's just, you have to use it, and you have to do it by creating rituals for yourself. So, you ask yourself, my recommendation for how to do that is write at the same time, the same place, every single day. So pick a time when you can mentally afford to write, because writing can be a kind of mentally taxing thing. So pick a time when you can afford that, to do that, and pick a place where you will be focused, where you can be distraction free. For me, myself, I write in my room the best. I can genuinely write anywhere, but I don't need kind of an exterior motivation personally. So I just happen to write in my room a lot, because I don't really have to go anywhere. I can go to the bathroom, I can make snacks or whatever. I write in my room just because that's where I happen to be. I know Ethan is the opposite. Ethan needs to write in a coffee shop or a cafe or something like that. He needs to be in a public place when he writes. So, it's different for everyone, but I would really recommend that you pick a time and a place where you can be distraction free, and do it every single day. Don't just write when you feel like it, because otherwise you're never going to write anything. Because as I said, you're going to be feeling a lot more than often than not, you're not going to feel inspired. You're going to feel like, ugh, writing, I don't want to write today. I don't want to do this. And if you give in to those feelings, you're just not going to write. And obviously there's times when it's time for a mental break, and it is time to take a break. And I try to write every day, but there's some days that I need to take a rest. And writing, I should add too, doesn't always look like sitting down and writing pages of a script. There's a process that I have for screenwriting, which is very particular, and things that you wouldn't think of as writing are writing. So for instance, today, there's a book I am adapting, and so part of my research today was to create a timeline for the events that take place in that book. So when it comes time to doing the outline and the beat sheet and all that kind of stuff, that I have all those details in order. So that's one of those things that, hey, sitting down, reading a book and writing down dates, that doesn't seem like writing. Well, it is, because it's all ultimately going to feed into that project at the end of the day. So writing isn't always necessarily pulling up Highland 2 or Celtics or Writer's Duet and typing pages in dialogue. Sometimes it's doing research. And so whether it is doing research, whether it's writing, whether it's creating character backstories, no matter what you're doing, just make sure you do something every single day. That would be kind of your my first little piece of information advice for writers. Excuse me. My second piece of advice is, and before I move on, actually, if you have any questions about anything I'm saying, please let me know in the comments down below. If you're watching us on YouTube or if you're listening to us on Spotify, feel free to DM us on our socials or comment on this YouTube video. Because normally, if I was, I'm kind of trying to teach this almost like a little class. All the way I've organized this. And normally when I'm teaching, I like to stop and pause and ask if anybody has any questions. I can't do that on a podcast, so if you have any questions, please just leave them down below. But I'm going to move on to my next point, which is finish the first draft. So everybody, I think in terms of writing, let's see, how do I put this? In terms of writing, most people have a dream of making a movie. Not everybody even finishes a first draft. So if you finish a first draft of your script, you are already ahead of way more people. And the reason that is because writing a first draft is really, really hard. So I make it a habit to finish every draft that I start. So the first draft and the reason it's really difficult is because the first draft of your script always has issues. It is always terrible. But part of that is you have to get that garbage out of your system. I'm not exactly sure why. I don't know how it works, but essentially give yourself the first draft should always be the vomit draft, the garbage draft, no matter what. I kind of think about it like you're filtering stuff out. Like you have, say, this isn't a perfect analogy, but say you have a lot of dirty water and you run it through a filter. The dirty stuff has to get filtered out, right, before it's clean and you can drink it. That's kind of what writing is like. You are pouring the stuff out of you. It has to be, all the garbage stuff has to come out first. And the more garbage stuff that you get out, the quicker it'll take to get to that good stuff. So you have to give yourself permission to write terrible stuff. There's parts of my first drafts that are literally just like where scenes are played out in like a couple of lines, or it's something as simple as so and so does this, so and so does this. There's a line of dialogue, and then the scene ends, right? And that's really bare bones minimum stuff. But if that's what it takes to write a first draft, that's what it takes. There's other scenes where I just have awful dialogue on purpose, awful prose on purpose, all that stuff. And it's just important that you're writing something, anything. And two, again, you have to get that garbage out of your system before you can get to the good stuff. It's kind of like you have to, no pain, no gain. It's going to pain you to write something awful, something that is awful, and putting it on the page and putting your name on it. That's the pain. But the gain is that you're going to have a really awesome second draft or third draft or fifth draft or however many drafts you write. For me personally, my draft count really varies. It depends on the project. I've written 15 drafts of certain projects, but there's also drafts of movies that I've where the first draft was the shooting script. So it kind of differs very to project. I can't really tell you much, but I will say that from my experience, the sweet spot to be is kind of around 5 or 6, because if you just shoot your first draft, you're not always necessarily filtering everything very thoroughly. I mean, that's not to say you can't have an awesome first draft. Maybe you can. But when you just shoot the first draft, that's usually, again, you're not filtering stuff. But if you write 15 drafts of a script, it's very easy to find yourself second guessing every single piece of information in your screenplay. And it comes to a point where you don't even know what's good, and you're quite honestly probably very sick of that project. So for me, draft 5 to 6, maybe 7, that's like the best ideal draft count for a script before it hopefully is ready. Some drafts, again, some scripts take longer, some take less, but for me personally, that's just where I find it. Anyways, no, you got to finish every first draft, pretty much. That's just my advice, because it is the hardest draft to write. And once you're finished with the hardest part, you know, everything's downhill from there. And I mean, the hardest part of writing truly is writing that first draft. And if you can't finish it, you can never actually make that movie. And this kind of goes back to discipline versus inspiration. If you force yourself to finish every draft that you start, you will write a lot more screenplays. I guarantee that. And you know, I mean, that's the thing too. I finish every draft of that I start, but also particularly the first draft. But if you finish every single draft of your script, again, you're gonna write a whole lot more than everybody else, because like I said, there's lots of people dreams, aspirations of being film writers or directors or, you know, whatever you call it, and they start the draft and they don't finish it, or they never put pen to paper because it's just too daunting to them. And so by just putting the work in, you're going to come to that, you know, if writing is a mountain that you have to climb, and you have to climb up 1,000 drafts before you get good at it or write something decent, the more you write, the closer you are to that 1,000, you know, draft count or whatever. My analogies are really messy and all over the place today, so I wish I had a singular image to tie this whole thing together, but I don't, because I'm partially making this up, but whatever. So, on to point number 3. Again, if you have any comments or questions, please leave them down below, and I'm going to take a sip of coffee before I begin. Okay. When I talk really long for these podcasts, I can definitely feel my voice drying out, so bear with me here. So, point number 3. This is about my process, my advice. So part of what now this is an analogy that I think is a good analogy for writing. So my belief is that writing is like sculpting. What happens when sculptors sculpt, right, is they get a huge block of clay, or I don't know what else you can sculpt with, but let's just say for our argument, it's clay. They get a block of clay, and it looks nothing like a Greek bust or the Statue of David or whatever. It doesn't look anything like that. But the artist has that idea in their head, and they don't just start by making a cut, right, and carving into the marble or the clay, and suddenly, aha, it's the Statue of David. It just doesn't work like that, right? There's layers of that rock, that clay that they have to cut through first, and they have to plan it out, and they have to figure all that stuff out. So I say writing is like clay because in the beginning you start with a huge block of clay. That's your idea. Your job as a writer is to whittle that idea down and sculpt it and carve it into the Statue of David or another statue. I don't know what other famous statues there are, but you get what I'm saying. You chip away a little bit at it by doing the beat sheet. Now, the beat sheet, I have done videos on this, my writing process. The beat sheet is the bare bones of the story. It's literally just the beats, told in about 9 sentences or so. There's 3 acts. Within each of those acts, well, let's go down specific. So I guess because it's supposed to be extensive. There's Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Act 1 starts with the setup. It is the normal world, the world as it is, the status quo. You can do that in 1 sentence. That is not a difficult thing to do. Then there is a turning point. Something happens to change the status quo. Then you're on to the new situation. That is the new status quo. So far, that's 1, 2, 3 sentences. Sentence 1 is the setup. Sentence 2, the turning point. Sentence 3, that is the status quo. Remember, turning point is when something big happens or some big piece of information is revealed. Then at the end of Act 1, you have turning point 2. Then something bigger happens. Then, in Act 2, you have progress. That is your next stage. That is your next sentence. Your protagonist is working towards a goal. Then you have the midpoint, or turning point 3, another big change that raises the stakes. Then you have complications and higher stakes. Your protagonist continues to a goal, turning point 4. a huge event that changes things once again. And then you're in the third act. There's a final push in the third act where your protagonist reflects and prepares. Then there's the climax, which is turning point 5, and then there's the aftermath. um, that's the beat sheet right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 sentences. Now, just to recap that in case, because I kind of jumped around. You have, this is in the order. So what I would recommend is write these words out on a document. Not next to, like, write the first thing, do a space, or hit enter. So you jump down a line, write the next thing, and then jump down a line. You're going to type in setup, turning point number 1, new situation, turning point number 2, progress, turning point number 3, complications and higher stakes, turning point number 4, final push, turning point 5, then aftermath. Those are the things that you're going to write down. In those places, write down a sentence. Make your movie in, I have to count again because I forgot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11. Write down those 11 things, and you should have 11 sentences that tell your story. It's the bare bones. This happens, then this happens, and then this happens. That is the beat sheet. That is carving into our marble just a little bit at a time. Then, from there, you move on to the outline. Now, the outline can be expanded much, much more. You're thinking a lot more about the logistics. In the beat sheet, you wrote, hopefully, what happens. In the outline, you can start to think about how things happens. You can write things where, this scene will go here. This scene will go here. George and Sally meet in the hallway and they talk about X, Y, and Z, right? That's, a little bullet point you can put in your outline. Your outline is essentially just an expanded version of your beat sheet. You want to take each of those beats and maybe expand upon it, 3 to 4 times. You want to come up with kind of logistical things, start thinking about that a little bit more. And again, you're just carving into those pieces of information. You're carving into the rock. You're whittling down your story till it becomes more and more detailed. Because I like to work from the macro, then I work inwards to the micro. After you finish the outline, you write the scriptment. The scriptment is literally the screenplay for your movie. The only difference is you do not write a single bit of dialogue. Instead of what you do is you type out what the conversation will be about in red text. So for instance, let's say the scene, if I had a scriptment, it would say, interior, high school day, George and Sally approach each other. It is busy in the hallways, the bell rings, all that kind of prose stuff, right? That would be what I would type. I'd type in the action line first. Then I wouldn't write down what George and Sally say. Instead, I would write down, George asks Sally about the homework. Sally asks about, the science test or something like that. It's just summarized and written in bold red text, essentially. Then, once you're done with that, you move on to the actual script. And ideally, when you come to the script, you don't have to worry about any of those action lines because all you have to worry about is the dialogue and just filling in those red gaps. So this is helpful for me because it separates really the parts of writing, the process of screenwriting, into an easy kind of tangible goalpost sort of way. Again, you're whittling things down from a macro level down to a micro level. It's really hard for me to plan where my film will go as I'm, writing the action lines and I'm writing the dialogue all at once. It's hard for me to know where these arcs are going to go if I'm coming up with all of that at once. What this does, it allows you to think about the big picture of your movie, then slowly lets you focus in on the smaller picture. And that's why this is really helpful to me, and that's why I kind of equate writing to sculpting, because that's what you got to do usually. Now, there are some writers who like to just jump into a script and they'll write and they'll discover it as they goes along. That's totally fine. But for me and for writers that struggle with screenwriting, like, how do I do this? It seems so unfathomable how to write a screenplay. Well, this is how you can do it, by breaking it down into these easy steps. There's 4 stages: beat sheet, outline, scriptment, then the script. And I think if people have that kind of that step-by-step process, it can make things a little bit easier to manage and handle and visualize. And again, I'm pretty sure I have a video on this on our channel. So if you go to our screenwriting playlist, you can find a video on my writing process. It's 4 stages. And once I kind of figured this out, it kind of cracked the code for me on how to write, and I was able to write a lot more than I had in years before. Okay, excuse me. Took a sip from coffee. My mouth is getting dry again a little bit. Anyways, that's kind of my advice in terms of, how do you go from an idea to a fleshed out script, or I guess a first draft, is take it through those stages. My next piece of advice, let's see, that was 1, 2, 3, 4. Little piece of advice number 4. This is, not even really my advice, but it is a resource that has really helped me. I would say that, in terms of podcasts and resources, there's a lot of great stuff out there, but by far the best resource for screenwriters is a podcast called Script Notes. It's hosted by John August and Craig Mazin. They are writers who've been working in Hollywood for a long time, and every week they talk about things that are interesting to screenwriters. That can be full-on writing advice, that can be business advice, that can be things happening within the industry, and it's a really good listen to if you are interested in screenplays in any way, shape, or form. So and that's not even my advice number 4. My piece of information number 4. If you're never going to listen to Script Notes except for one episode, you need to listen to episode 403. It's Craig Mazin detailing his thesis, so to speak, on how to write a movie. Oh, and I guess I should say this, retroactively, this applies to my just previous piece of information with my, my writing process in the 4 stages, but also to the Script Notes episode. A lot of this advice is geared towards the traditional Hollywood narrative kind of movie. This isn't going to apply to every single type of movie that is out there that exists. Not every single movie needs to follow the same structure or beats, stuff like that. But I think that, I think what most people want is to write a traditional narrative to an extent. They don't want it to be predictable, but they want to have something that, kind of like, it's just solid, reliable at the very bare minimum. And so that's what this Hollywood kind of format is. That's what this traditional narrative kind of really allows you to do. Because once you know the rules of drama and story, you can break them and you can play around with them. And that's not to say that everybody needs to stay within the realm of traditional narrative, but that's what most of this advice applies to, because it's a hard thing for people to do and crack. Anyways, in episode 403 of Script Notes, Craig Mazin gives his, whole thesis on how you write a traditional narrative. And I'm not going to bore you with, watered down information of like what he says. I'm just going to say, please go listen to Script Notes episode 403. But these are some pretty good golden nuggets that he has peppered throughout the episode. So something that spoke to me when I listened to this is he says, structure is a symptom of a character's relationship with a central dramatic argument. This is also known as theme. He talks about how your film, your story is it's not plot. Plot is a symptom. Plot and structure are a symptom of the character's relationship with the dramatic center of the film, which is an argument. There's a thesis, there's an antithesis, and by the end of it, there is a synthesis. And that's really what your movie is. And your job as a writer is to take your character from ignorance of the truth to the embodiment of the theme through action. First, you disrupt the status quo. This wouldn't disrupt every character's life the way it is disrupting your character. Your character will try to return to the status quo. You don't have to push them in the you have to push them in the other direction. Plot doesn't happen to characters. You do it to them. You have to think about what's the worst thing you could do to your character and then do it. Those are pieces of information that I got from his episode. of Script Notes, episode 403. Everybody watch it, listen to it. It is a masterclass. It is a brilliant breakdown of what goes into a Hollywood narrative with tangible examples. He breaks down the script Finding Nemo in that film and how that applies, and really helps you visualize what that looks like. And so to anyone struggling with screenwriting, I would honestly, don't even listen to this. Don't even listen to my podcast. Listen to episode 403 of Script Notes. Okay. Yeah. Let's move on to the next piece of advice. Which is kind of, tied in. I mean, Craig Mazin talks about this in his podcast, but I believe that in a traditional narrative, story is conflict. I think that's just a great piece of information to keep in mind as you're writing. When everyone's getting along, when everything's going well, it's not always as interesting to the audience. I mean, you can make it interesting to the audience. There's no doubt about that. But story is conflict. And so you have to have conflict. If there's no conflict, you don't have a story. You have slice of life. You have something else. And again, I'm speaking in terms of traditional Hollywood narrative. I'm not speaking in terms of more slow cinema or avant-garde cinema and stuff like that. Because there's lots of movies that I love that don't follow any of this advice. But, in general, story is conflict, and the way you reveal that conflict and explore that conflict, that's what makes it interesting. Spicy take alert. This is where, okay, this is kind of where I've been in the last few years in terms of my screenwriting journey, or filmmaking journey, I guess I should say. My hot take in terms of filmmaking is that screenplays are not important, or not as important as you would be led to believe. There is kind of this myth out there among film students and screenwriters that there is such a thing as a perfect script, and that every setup must have a payoff, that there's a perfect way to write and a structure to a movie. But this is just blatantly false. If you followed all the rules and structures and the story do's and don'ts, you will likely have a very well-structured movie, but also a very bland movie, very predictable movie. Every movie is different. Movies, at the end of the day, are an emotional experience, and scripts cannot always fully capture this. Some movies do require that you need interweaving threads and clever setups and clever payoffs. That is something that some movies require. Off the top of my head, something like Seven, the David Fincher movie, where it's a detective story, right? Most detective movies need that interweaving of threads and all that kind of thing. Other movies like Toy Story, right, need those kind of interweaving threads, with less on plot threads, but more on emotional beats with setups and payoffs. But other movies are very, very, very simple and don't appear to be about anything important. Look at the before, is it Sunrise trilogy? Before Richard Linklater's movies, Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, Before Midnight, or something like those. Those three movies he made, they're just a couple talking. There's not really just sharing their insight about life. That's not, something that, that's a movie. Brilliant. Those are a brilliant series of movies that break the rules of screenwriting, because it's just two people talking the entire time, and it's great. It's awesome. It's really, really engaging. And other movies, going the other way, are totally chaotic, and you have to investigate the meaning because they are avant-garde or experimental. Something like, like Kenneth Anger or Stan Brakhage or something like that. There's a whole spectrum of cinema, and to say that your movie needs a screenplay, or your screenplay is the most important thing about your movie, that's not something that it is always real. It's always true. So before you, I guess, even commit to writing a script, you have to figure out what kind of movie you want to make, and then determine how important the script is. The script is not always the most important thing. You sometimes you don't even need a script at all. You can just start shooting, like what Joel Haver does. Um, I some of my most favorite movies are scripted, and some of my most favorite movies are not scripted. There's a whole spectrum of cinema, and but it is my genuine belief that once these, because remember, people, we're not writing scripts just to write scripts. You know, we're we're here to make a movie, not a screenplay. If the thing you care about the most is your writing or your dialogue or your structure and all that kind of stuff, you're in the wrong medium, because you should be in writing plays, or you should be writing books if you care about the writing that much. You are here to write a movie, make a great movie. And that's not always going to come across in your script. Your script isn't going to be the determining factor in making a great movie. And if you were in the film business, if you're here to make movies, you're here to make a movie, not a perfect screenplay. Necessarily. I should preface that. So I would encourage everyone who, wants to make films, look at the films that you like and you really engage with and that engage you, because I did a little bit of cinematic soul searching in the last few years, and what I discovered was the films that I really respond to the most are driven by emotion and by mood and tone, rather than by the dialogue or the screenplay or the story even. I really like films that are a lot more avant-garde. And so I realized that, I've been working on writing screenplays for years, but I don't even care that much about the perfect script. I mean, obviously I put a lot of thought into the stuff that I write, but now I've come to a place where before I go into a project, I have to compartmentalize. Is this a piece of cinema or is this a story-driven film? Because in my head, there's a distinction. There's movies that are driven by story, and there's movies that are driven by cinema. And so when your script becomes the most important thing, you can't focus on the cinema necessarily. You have to do what's right for the story at the end of the day. And there's nothing wrong with that, but look into what you like and your preferences in movies, and see if there's how those screenplays are. See how those movies were written and that sort of thing, because that'll give you a good indication of, how important will scripts be in your movies. Because some filmmakers, they just do storyboards, and they love storyboarding primarily. They don't care so much about the script. It's all in the storyboards. And so I would encourage you to look into that personally for what your preferences are. Because at the end of the day, remember, it's all art. Art is subjective. There's no right or wrong. It's just a matter of what do you like, and pursue that. Follow your bliss, as Joseph Campbell would say. Yeah. Next point, which is completely less philosophical. Script format does not matter. There's a lot of people out there who will say that script format is the most important thing. If you have your script formatted in a different way, people will throw it in the trash. And this is something that they teach in film schools, but that's not advice that people really follow in the real world, because there's lots of brilliant movies that were produced from scripts with a completely unconventional format. And I don't mean like format in terms of the story structure. I mean format in terms of what does it physically look like on the page. And a great example of this is the script for A Quiet Place. If you haven't checked it out, it's very easy to find. The script for A Quiet Place. It is written, some pages are full of stuff, but then other pages are completely blank except for one word on them. So, anyone who tells you that script format matters that much is lying, and they don't know what they're talking about. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is, can the people who read this understand what's going on? That's all you need to worry about. Again, you're making a movie, not a script. You need your script to capture the emotion and what it will be like to see your movie. And if that entails leaving an entire page blank, except for putting one word at the bottom, or writing a normal page and then halfway through you have a couple words that are like, size 25 in font, do it. Because you have to capture what it's going to feel like when you watch that movie. So Anyone who tells you script format matters, don't worry about them. They don't know what they're talking about. Just, you know, again, worry about, can my reader understand what's going on? Do the people who are making the movie understand what's going on? If they can, great. You don't need to worry about anything else. And along those lines, a little side note, I didn't even show anybody a script for La Danza. That's the movie I'm making right now, and I didn't show anybody that script. So you don't always need a script for a movie. Anyways, next point. And last point, I think, because I think we're at a good place to end things here with this, kind of wrap this piece of advice up. I don't believe that there's any such a thing as bad dialogue. I just don't, because there's no such thing as a bad movie, in my opinion. It's all subjective, and the dialogue is it's all relative to the experience of your movie and the kind of story that you're telling, and it depends on the world you've created. So Napoleon Dynamite, the characters, that character Napoleon Dynamite would sound completely out of place in a Safdie brothers movie or a Quentin Tarantino movie, right? If someone did sound like Napoleon Dynamite in a Tarantino movie or a Safdie brothers movie, it would sound quote unquote bad. If someone sounded like Aaron Sorkin, but the movie was like, if it was, Wes Anderson, right? That would sound completely out of place and quote unquote bad. And it depends on the performance. And directors all use dialogue completely differently. Look at something like George Lucas, someone who's famous for supposedly bad writing, but George Lucas doesn't care about dialogue. He uses dialogue very impressionistically. He uses it to be broad, very over the top, straight to the point, very direct. But all of his visuals contain the subtext and the metaphors and the motifs. His real value as a filmmaker is putting the subtext and all that stuff in the visuals, not in the dialogue. The dialogue is there to be direct and to the point. Meanwhile, Aaron Sorkin's dialogue feels like you're listening to a chess game. Two people dueling, and there's chess moves, and there's attacks and counterattacks and parries and all that kind of stuff. That's how Aaron Sorkin uses dialogue, and there's no wrong way to do it. But I think you got to make it right for your movie at the end of the day. That's all you got to worry about. So, I know I said about like writing bad dialogue earlier. But even again, it depends. That's all relative to the movie. Because again, it depends on what you are going for. Yeah. Let me take a sip of my coffee here. Okay. That was, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 screenwriting points. Wow, 8 screenwriting points in about 50 minutes or so. That's pretty good, I think. Better than film school. I'm joking. Well, kind of not joking. Depends. I don't know. Film school, that's a complicated subject for us at Doom Productions. But anyway, I'm going to move on to, I guess I should say, if you have any questions about screenwriting, please leave them down in the comments below. Like I said, we have a screenwriting playlist on our channel. You can check out my previous episodes and videos on podcasts or on screenwriting and all that kind of goodness. And again, I am not a master. I'm not perfect at this screenwriting. This is just what I've learned along the way in my many years of doing this. So I want to move on to our next segment of what are you working on? Our 2 closing segments of the show are what are you working on and what are you watching? So what am I working on? I am editing La Danza, the movie I just shot. It is going very, very interestingly and well. I've never ever edited a project like this before. There was a script produced for it, but it was really kind of more like an outline to an extent. The script was produced. It is a screenplay. You can read it. But I knew that the visuals would be way more important. So after the script, I considered the storyboards to be kind of my second draft. and that's what we shot them based on, as the storyboards. And just the style of the movie dictated that, you know, I knew that the storyboards were one thing, and I knew that as I got into the editing, things would be completely different and change, which has come to pass. The movie on the editing timeline right now resembles nothing of the script and the storyboards to an extent. I mean, there's shots and moments and vignettes that are there that are clearly taken from the storyboards, but as a whole, like if you were to read the screenplay from beginning to end, or look at the storyboards from beginning to end, and look at the movie as it will be from beginning to end, it will be a very, very different project completely. Which I find totally exciting and creatively stimulating, personally. It is... I mean, I really don't want to spoil anything, but I'll say that... I can't say that because I would spoil stuff. Yeah, it's very, very different. And kind of what to expect is it's really driven by mood and tone and emotion. I guess I'll just say that. I will say here's where I am with the process. I guess this is something tangible. So after we shot the movie, see, I make it a habit of, after I shoot, a day of shooting, is I drop everything onto the timeline and I cut it together and try to get it to as close as finished as I can right away. The idea being that once the movie's all shot, ideally it's all locked. Ideally. That's definitely not the case with this, because after we finished shooting this, I dropped everything onto the timeline, and what I had was a very, very messy, long assembly cut of the movie. Which is, you know, it is what it is, but because of the way it was shot and the kind of movie it is, it didn't make sense to, like, just leave it as it is, right? I had to, and I am currently having to completely rearrange stuff. Absolutely completely. Like I said, it doesn't resemble the the final, or the script, or the storyboards much. So I was joking with some other filmmakers that I should just release the storyboards and the script publicly before the movie, because it doesn't give anything away. But no, I don't think I'll do that. But yeah, so where I'm at is so what I've done is I've taken that assembly, and as I've said, I'm rearranging stuff as I'm going along, starting from beginning to end. I've divided the film up into reels, so reel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's done mostly for the sake of the timeline, because when you get everything down onto one timeline, it takes a toll on your computer. So that's part of it. But so where I'm at is I'm going through the assembly, rearranging stuff completely, changing stuff, and I'm not even finalizing everything yet. I'm going to go through it as what I feel it should be. And once I'm done with that, I'll consider that my rough cut. After I'm done with the rough cut, I'm going to show it to some people. I'm going to look at it some more, watch it a few times, take some notes, rearrange stuff some further, and from there, I'll whittle it down into, you know, what will become the final version of the movie. I wouldn't expect it this year, but it'll definitely be out next year. And yeah, that's one thing I'm working on. The other thing I'm working on is, as I've said, and we said last time, is we're Doom Productions, we're adapting 3 different novels. So what I've been doing this past week is I've been going through the novel and doing a little bit of research and writing down dates and writing down character stuff and writing down kind of important details from the book that will be important when it comes to writing it. But yeah, that's been pretty exciting, pretty fun, different challenge. I've adapted stuff before, but never this kind of... I've never followed a book to the T, so to speak. So that's been fun. Different, challenging, but fun nonetheless. So I'm not gonna reveal what it is yet, but you know, for that, stay tuned, stay subscribed, and you'll hear all the updates on our big projects that we got going on. Anyways, on to the next segment. What are you watching? This will be their closing segment here on this podcast. So I watched Black Panther 2 again. I went to the theater. There's a theater out in St. John's here in Portland called the St. John's Twin Cinema. Cool little fun theater. I saw Black Panther 2 there. That was fun. That was, I like the movie. I think in terms of all the Marvel movies, I think I connect more with the Black Panther more than because some of the other ones I don't really connect too much, but I really connect with Black Panther and those movies. I think Ryan Coogler he's a great director, and so it's fun to see it again. And yeah, it's I mean, what can I say about it? I mean, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but I thought that it presented I mean, how do I sound not disingenuous about this, but having your lead actor die before you start the sequel to a movie is devastating, not just to, the movie obviously, but his family, right? And all his fans and everything. That's a pretty devastating loss. And it's only after that loss and kind of that kind of horrible traumatic, nature of passing away, it's after that, then that's when you can start thinking about, okay, how do we make a second one? Do we even do a second one? What do we do with this character? And I thought they handled that aspect of it really beautifully. The way they tied in, the absence of T'Challa's character and Chadwick Boseman's character. I thought that was done really, really well. And so that's what I'll say there. And because I don't want to spoil anything. Other than that, I haven't been watching a whole lot of movies. I've seen some stuff here and there. Mainly what I've been doing is I've gotten into anime now a little bit. I used to watch Dragon Ball Z as a kid and Dragon Ball, but since then I haven't really seen much anime. But this last year I just got into Attack on Titan, and so that's been pretty fun to watch. I'm not done with the first season yet, but I started watching an episode of Neon Genesis Evangelion every night for the last week or so, and usually I'm so tired that I fall asleep during the episode, and so the next night I have to go back and rewatch it. So I'm on episode 7, very early in, but I'm enjoying that. But the main thing that I'm really excited about, which I guess is more of what I'm looking forward to, I'm looking forward to Avatar 2, because the Avatar 2 tickets just went on sale, and I purchased some IMAX 3D tickets for it. I'm not usually a fan of 3D, but I figure for something like, I figured for something like James Cameron, right? You gotta go on out. Because I don't ever go to 3D movies. I don't usually pay to see IMAX movies, but if there was a movie to do it, it would be Avatar 2. So I am very, very excited for that. Yeah, the Avatar 2. So yeah, I am not gonna shut up about this for the next little bit, next month or so. So yeah. Anyways, yeah, that's the episode for today. Thank you for listening to me ramble about screenwriting and other things for the last hour or so. Really appreciate you tuning in here. If you like this video, like this episode of the podcast, please hit subscribe, please hit like, please share it with your friends too. It only takes a couple seconds out of your day, but it means a whole lot to us. And we promise that if you hit subscribe, you are going to see some cool stuff pop up on your feed in the next little bit. So thank you so much for watching and listening. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Hope you learned something from it. And until the next episode, have a good week.